The gunshots cracked through the morning air like thunder on the horizon, sending a flock of startled birds skyward as Willow Montgomery ducked behind an overturned wagon, her heart pounding against her ribs. It was 1876, and the small town of Redemption Creek, Arizona Territory, was supposed to be her fresh start, not her final resting place. "You can't run forever, Sin," a gravelly voice called out. Tobias Kane, the man who'd been hunting her across 3 territories, stood in the middle of the dusty street, flanked by his 3 remaining men. "Your father's debts are due, and I aim to collect one way or another." Willow checked the chambers of her revolver. 2 bullets left. Not enough to face 4 armed men. She'd been called Sin since St. Louis, when she defended herself against an unwanted advance from a prominent businessman who happened to be Tobias Kane's cousin. The name had followed her like a shadow ever since, whispered behind hands and scrawled on wanted posters that bore little resemblance to her actual face. "There's a back exit through the Mercantile," a deep voice whispered, startling her. Willow whipped around, raising her gun at the tall figure crouched beside her. His face was partially obscured by a worn leather hat, but she could see eyes as blue as a summer sky studying her with unexpected kindness. "And why would you help me, stranger?" she asked, finger resting near the trigger. "Name's Yates Calloway," he said, ignoring the gun pointed at him. "And I've got my reasons for disliking Kane and his bunch." "I don't need your charity," Willow replied, though her options were rapidly dwindling. A bullet splintered the wood near her head, making her flinch. "Charity ain't what I'm offering," Yates said, his voice steady despite the danger. "It's an opportunity. I need a skilled rider for my ranch, and you look capable. Plus, I've got 8 men with rifles who will make Kane think twice about following us." Another bullet hit the wagon, closer this time. "What makes you think I'm running from anything?" Willow challenged, though her voice wavered. Yates's mouth quirked up at one corner. "They're calling you Sin out there, and you're hiding behind a broken wagon with 2 bullets left. I don't need to know your story to know you could use a friend right now." "We're not friends," Willow said sharply. "Not yet," Yates agreed, unruffled. "But my offer stands. Come with me now or stay and face whatever Kane has planned. Your choice, Miss Montgomery, Willow Montgomery." The name felt strange on her tongue after months of hiding her identity. "Well, Miss Montgomery," Yates said, tipping his hat slightly, "what'll it be?" Another volley of gunfire peppered the wagon. Time had run out. "Lead the way, Mr. Callaway," she said, decision made, with a nod. Yates motioned toward the Mercantile behind them. "On my signal, run like the devil himself is on your heels." As they sprinted across the alley and through the back door of the Mercantile, shots rang out behind them. Inside, Yates grabbed her arm, guiding her through the storeroom and out another door where 2 horses waited, already saddled. "You planned this," Willow accused, even as she swung up onto the dappled mare. "Let's just say I noticed trouble brewing and made some arrangements," Yates replied, mounting his own stallion. "Head north. My men are waiting at the ridge." They galloped out of town, hooves thundering against the hard-packed dirt. Willow could hear shouts and more gunfire, but it faded as distance grew between them and Redemption Creek. True to his word, several riders appeared on the ridge ahead, rifles ready. As they reached the group, Yates called out, "Fall back to the ranch. We've got company coming." The men nodded, forming a protective circle around them as they continued north. Willow glanced back at the dust cloud rising behind them, Kane and his men in pursuit. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked Yates as they rode. For a long moment he was silent, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. Finally, he said, "Sometimes a man sees something worth saving." His gaze shifted to her, intense and unwavering. even when others see only sin. Willow felt something catch in her chest at his words, but she quickly tamped it down. She'd learned the hard way that trusting too easily led to heartbreak or worse. This arrangement with Yates Calloway was merely a temporary solution, a way to stay ahead of Kane until she could figure out her next move. She had no way of knowing that Yates Calloway would become much more than a temporary solution. That the man riding beside her would one day call her his salvation. The Callaway Ranch sprawled across a valley nestled between rolling hills, a haven of green in the otherwise arid landscape. A two-story main house stood proudly at the center, surrounded by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses. As they approached, Willow counted at least 20 men working around the property, far more than most ranches could afford. "You must be doing well for yourself," she remarked as they slowed their horses to a walk. "Hard work and good fortune," Yates replied, though something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. A ranch hand ran out to meet them, his expression worried. "Boss, you got trouble. Marshal Davis is here with some questions about cattle rustling near the Harmon place." Yates's jaw tightened. Kane must have friends in the marshal's office. That was quick, even for him. He turned to Willow. "Stay close to me. Let me do the talking." She nodded, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after their escape and hard ride. Her dark hair had mostly escaped its pins, and dust coated her clothes. The marshal stood on the porch of the main house, a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest, and skepticism etched into the lines of his weathered face. He watched their approach with narrowed eyes. "Callaway," he greeted curtly. "Interesting company you're keeping these days." "Marshal Davis," Yates replied evenly, dismounting and helping Willow down from her horse. "This is Miss Montgomery, my new ranch manager." Willow nearly stumbled at the unexpected promotion, but maintained her composure. "Ranch manager." The marshal's eyebrows rose. "Thought you handled that yourself." "Times are changing," Yates said. "Miss Montgomery has exceptional experience with cattle operations from up north." The marshal's gaze shifted to Willow, assessing. "That right, miss?" "Yes, sir," she replied, straightening her spine. "My father ran one of the largest operations in Wyoming territory before his passing. It wasn't entirely a lie." Her father had worked as a foreman on such a ranch before gambling away their savings and leaving her to fend for herself. The marshal didn't seem convinced. "Well, regardless, I'm here about the 20 head of cattle stolen from the Harmon spread last night. Got a witness says he saw riders heading this direction." "My men were all accounted for," Yates said firmly. "We've been preparing for the drive to Tucson next week." "Mind if I have a look around?" the marshal asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Be my guest," Yates said with a gesture toward the property. "Though I'd appreciate you not disrupting our work too much." As the marshal moved off with two of Yates's men as escorts, Willow turned to him with a questioning look. "Ranch manager," she whispered. "Had to give you a reason to be here," he replied quietly. "And I need someone in that position anyway. My last manager left 2 months ago." "I can't stay," Willow said, glancing nervously in the direction the marshal had gone. "Once Kane realizes I'm here, Kane won't come onto my property," Yates interrupted, a hard edge to his voice. "There's history there he won't want to revisit." Before she could ask what he meant, a woman emerged from the main house. She was perhaps in her 50s, with silver threading through her dark hair and a kind face that lit up at the sight of Yates. "There you are," she called. "I was beginning to worry when I heard the marshal arrived." "Everything's fine, Alina," Yates assured her. "This is Miss Willow Montgomery. She'll be taking over as ranch manager. Miss Montgomery, this is Alina Vasquez, our housekeeper and the woman who's kept me alive and somewhat respectable for the past 15 years. Alina smiled warmly at Willow, though her sharp eyes missed nothing. "Welcome, Miss Montgomery. You look like you could use a hot bath and a meal. Come inside and I'll show you to your room." Too exhausted to argue, Willow followed Alina into the house, aware of Yates watching them go. The interior was surprisingly elegant, with polished wood floors and comfortable furnishings that spoke of taste rather than ostentation. The boss didn't mention he was hiring a woman for the manager position, Alina remarked as she led Willow upstairs. "It was a recent decision," Willow replied carefully. Alina stopped at the top of the stairs, turning to face her directly. "Those men in town, they were after you, yes." Willow hesitated, then nodded. Alina's expression softened. "Yates has a habit of collecting strays, though usually they have 4 legs. Whatever your troubles, you're safe here. He's a good man, one of the few." "I don't plan to stay long," Willow said. Alina just smiled. "That's what they all say. Here's your room. Rest. I'll bring up water for a bath." Left alone, Willow sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. The room was larger than any she'd had before, with a window overlooking the valley and mountains beyond. A perfect view of potential approaching danger, she noted automatically. She hadn't asked to be rescued. Hadn't wanted to be indebted to anyone, especially not a man like Yates Calloway who clearly had secrets of his own. Yet here she was, supposedly a ranch manager, hiding from Tobias Kane in a stranger's home. A temporary solution, she reminded herself. She would rest, recover, perhaps earn enough money for passage farther west, and then she would go. Before Kane found her. Before she brought danger to these people who had shown her unexpected kindness. Before she started believing she could have a place here. Before she started wondering why Yates Calloway had looked at her and seen something worth saving. Willow was awakened by a soft knock on her door. She sat up with a start, momentarily disoriented until the events of the day came rushing back. The gunfight in town. The escape. The Callaway ranch. "Miss Montgomery," Alina's voice called. "Dinner will be served in 20 minutes if you're feeling up to it." "Thank you," Willow replied, rising from the bed. "I'll be down shortly." After washing her face and doing her best to make herself presentable, Willow descended the stairs, following the sound of voices to a large dining room. Yates stood at the head of the table, deep in conversation with an older man whose weathered face suggested decades under the Arizona sun. They both looked up as she entered. "Ah, Miss Montgomery," Yates said, moving to pull out a chair for her. "I hope you were able to get some rest. This is Hector Mendoza, my foreman." Hector nodded respectfully. "Miss Montgomery, the boss says you'll be taking over management duties." "That appears to be the case," Willow replied, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "Though I'm still learning the specifics of Mr. Callaway's operation. We can discuss that after dinner," Yates said as Alina and a young woman brought in platters of food. The marshal left, by the way, found nothing of interest as expected. "But it won't be the last we see of him," Hector added grimly. "Not with Kane spreading tales in town." Willow tensed at the mention of Kane. "He knows I'm here, he suspects," Yates replied, his expression carefully neutral. "But he won't make a move tonight. Too many guns between him and what he wants." The meal progressed with talk of ranch business, the upcoming cattle drive, concerns about water access during the dry season, repairs needed for the south fence line. Willow listened attentively, asking questions when appropriate and offering suggestions based on her limited knowledge. To her surprise, Yates and Hector seemed to take her input seriously. After dinner, Yates invited her to his study, a comfortable room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk covered in papers. "You handled yourself well at dinner," he remarked, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey and offering her one. Willow accepted the drink but remained standing. "I still don't understand why you're going to such lengths to help me. The position, the cover story, it's a lot of trouble for a stranger." Yates took a seat behind his desk, gesturing for her to sit as well. "Kane and I have history. Bad history. He's been trying to get his hands on my land for years, and I've been a thorn in his side just as long." "So I'm what a convenient way to irritate him further?" Willow asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "No," Yates said firmly. "You're someone who needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. The fact that it annoys Kane is just a bonus." He took a sip of his whiskey. "But now I need to know what I'm dealing with. Why is he hunting you?" Willow stared into her glass, debating how much to reveal. "Finally," she said, "my father owed him money, a lot of money. When my father died 6 months ago, Kane came to collect from me instead. And that's all," Yates pressed, his blue eyes searching hers. She looked away. "His cousin took liberties at a social gathering in St. Louis. I defended myself with a letter opener. The cousin lived, but my reputation didn't. They started calling me Sin after that. Said I was a woman of loose morals who tried to seduce a married man, then attacked him when he rejected me." Yates's knuckles whitened around his glass. "That's not how Kane tells it in town." "I imagine not," Willow replied bitterly. "What version is he spreading now? That you're a thief who stole family heirlooms before disappearing, that you worked your way into his cousin's confidence, then betrayed him." Willow laughed without humor. "Convenient. The only thing I took was my mother's locket, which he tried to claim as partial payment for my father's debts." She reached for the thin chain around her neck, pulling out a small silver locket. "It's not worth much in money, but it's all I have left of her." Yates studied her for a long moment. "Well, Miss Montgomery, it seems we both have reasons to keep Kane at bay. I meant what I said about the manager position. I need someone with a good head for figures and a willingness to speak their mind. You've demonstrated both." "I'm not qualified," she protested. "You know more than you think," he countered. "And you can learn the rest. I'll pay you fair wages, provide room and board, and ensure Kane doesn't get within 100 yards of you. All I ask in return is honest work and loyalty to the ranch." It was too good an offer, which made Willow suspicious. "And when Kane eventually moves on, when I'm no longer useful as a way to antagonize him," something flickered in Yates's eyes, hurt, perhaps, or disappointment. "The job is yours for as long as you want it, regardless of Kane." "I don't use people as pawns, Miss Montgomery." She hadn't meant to offend him, but years of hard lessons had taught her to question generosity. "I apologize for suggesting otherwise," she said quietly. "I accept your offer, Mr. Callaway. For now," he nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. We'll start your training tomorrow. Hector will show you the operation, introduce you to the men. What about the marshal, if he returns?" "We'll deal with that if it happens," Yates said with confidence that should have been reassuring but somehow wasn't. "For now, get some rest." "Dawn comes early on a ranch." As Willow rose to leave, Yates added, "One more thing. The men here respect strength and competence. Don't let anyone mistake your gender for weakness." "They won't," Willow promised, a hint of steel in her voice. "Good night, Mr. Callaway." "Good night, Miss Montgomery." As she closed the study door behind her, Willow couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a decision that would change the course of her life. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Yates had Hector show Willow every aspect of the ranch operation, from the breeding program for their prized horses to the careful management of grazing lands that kept Callaway cattle fat when other ranchers struggled. To her surprise, Willow found herself enjoying the work. She had a quick mind for figures and organization, skills that proved valuable as she reviewed the ranch's books and supply orders. The physical aspects of ranch life, the early mornings, long rides, and practical problem-solving suited her as well. It was honest work, far removed from the artificial social constraints that had bound her in St. Louis. Most of the ranch hands accepted her with minimal grumbling, especially after she demonstrated her skill with horses and her willingness to work as hard as any of them. A few held reservations, particularly an older hand named Crawford, who made no secret of his belief that women had no place in ranch management. "Been doing this work 30 years, he complained loudly one evening as Willow outlined a new rotation for the night watch. "Now I'm supposed to take orders from a city girl who's been here less than a month." Before Willow could respond, Yates's voice cut through the bunkhouse. "You're welcome to find employment elsewhere, Crawford, if Miss Montgomery's competence offends you so deeply." Crawford's face reddened, but he muttered an apology and fell silent. Yates caught Willow's eye with a brief nod before continuing his rounds, leaving her to finish explaining the new schedule. She appreciated his support, but was determined to win the men's respect on her own merits. Her opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days later, while Yates was away in Tucson arranging the final details for their cattle sale, a summer storm blew in from the mountains. The sudden deluge turned the normally placid creek that ran through the ranch into a raging torrent, threatening the lower pasture where 24 pregnant mares were grazing. Willow was reviewing supply lists with Alina when Hector burst into the house, water streaming from his hat and coat. "The creek's breached its banks near the east bend," he reported urgently. "We need to move those mares before they're trapped." Without hesitation, Willow was on her feet. "Get every available man. We'll need ropes, lanterns, and the strongest swimmers among the hands. Where's Crawford?" "Already headed to the lower pasture with Miguel and the Torres brothers," Hector replied. "Good. Tell him I said to start moving the mares to higher ground. I'll meet you there in 5 minutes." By the time Willow reached the lower pasture, rain was falling in sheets, reducing visibility to mere yards. The creek had indeed overflowed, creating a rapidly expanding lake that had already cut off the direct route to the higher pasture. Crawford and his small team were attempting to herd the nervous mares through increasingly muddy terrain, but the animals were panicking, reluctant to move through the storm. Willow urged her horse forward, calling out to Crawford above the howl of the wind. "We need to create a path through the western edge. The water's still shallow enough there." Crawford nodded grimly, abandoning his previous route to follow her lead. Together, they managed to guide most of the herd toward safer ground, but 3 mares had become separated, stranded on what was quickly becoming an island in the middle of the flood. "The current's too strong," Miguel shouted as they assessed the situation. "We'll lose the horses if we try to reach them." Crawford looked to Willow, waiting for her decision. The responsibility weighed heavily. These mares represented a significant investment for the ranch, not to mention the unborn foals they carried. "Secure a rope to that oak," she ordered, pointing to a sturdy tree on the bank. "I'll cross with my horse and bring them back one by one." "Miss Montgomery, that's too dangerous," Hector protested. "My horse is the strongest swimmer we have," Willow said, already uncoiling a length of rope from her saddle. "And I'm lighter than any of you. We don't have time to argue." Before anyone could object further, she urged her mount into the swirling water. The horse fought against the current, powerful legs working to keep them both afloat as they made their way to the stranded mares. The crossing seemed to take an eternity, but finally, they reached the small island of higher ground. Working quickly, Willow secured a rope around the first mare's neck, using it to guide the frightened animal back through the water. The return journey was even more treacherous, with both horses struggling against the powerful current, but they made it to the bank where the men waited to pull them the final few yards to safety. Twice more Willow crossed the flood waters, each time returning with another mare. By the third crossing, she was exhausted, her clothes soaked through and her hands raw from the ropes, but determination kept her going. As she guided the final mare to shore, her own horse stumbled in the current, nearly going under. For a terrifying moment, Willow thought they would both be swept away, but then strong hands were grabbing her, pulling her and the mare the last few feet to solid ground. She looked up to find Crawford gripping her arm, steadying her as she dismounted on shaky legs. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've seen in 30 years of ranching," he said gruffly. "Probably both." Willow managed a tired smile. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Crawford nodded, a new respect in his eyes. "Reckon so, Miss Montgomery, reckon so." By the time Yates returned the following day, word of Willow's actions had spread throughout the ranch. The story had grown with each telling, until one might have believed she'd swum across a raging river with a mare under each arm. The truth was impressive enough she'd risked her life to save valuable livestock, showing courage and leadership when it mattered most. Yates found her in the barn, checking on the rescued mares. He stood watching her for a moment, taking in the gentle way she spoke to the animals, the confident movements of someone who knew their worth and place. "Hector tells me you're the hero of the hour," he said, making his presence known. Willow looked up, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "Hardly. I just did what needed doing." "That's what makes a leader," Yates replied, moving closer to examine one of the mares. "Recognizing what needs to be done and having the courage to do it." His eyes met hers. "Even Crawford is singing your praises, which might be the most miraculous part of this whole affair." A smile tugged at Willow's lips. "He's not so bad, just set in his ways." "Like most of us," Yates agreed, his gaze lingering on her face. "I'm glad you're all right when I heard what happened." Something in his voice made Willow's heart beat faster. There was concern there, yes, but something else too, something warmer, more personal than a boss's worry for an employee. "It would have been poor repayment for your kindness to lose your best breeding mares," she said, trying to keep her tone light. "The mares could be replaced," Yates said quietly. "You couldn't be." The simple statement hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Willow found herself unable to look away from his blue eyes, now dark with an emotion she dared not name. The moment was broken by Alina's voice calling from outside the barn. "Yates, are you in there? There's a telegram from Tucson." Yates stepped back, the spell broken. "Coming." He called, then turned back to Willow. "We'll talk more at dinner. There are some things you should know." As he walked away, Willow released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. In that brief exchange, something had shifted between them, moving beyond employer and employee to something else. Something that both thrilled and terrified her, because despite her growing feelings for Yates Calloway, she hadn't forgotten the danger that had brought her to his ranch in the first place. Tobias Kane was still out there, waiting, and sooner or later he would make his move. That evening, dinner was a celebratory affair, with Alina preparing Willow's favorite dishes and the ranch hands stopping by the main house to toast her bravery. Even Crawford raised a glass, his earlier reservations apparently washed away by the same flood that had nearly claimed the mares. By the time the festivities wound down and most of the hands returned to the bunkhouse, Willow was exhausted but contented. It had been a long time since she'd felt part of something, since she'd been valued for her contributions rather than judged for her circumstances. As promised, Yates invited her to join him in his study after dinner. This time, instead of sitting behind his desk, he settled into one of the comfortable chairs near the fireplace, gesturing for her to take the other. "I received some concerning news in Tucson," he began without preamble. "Kane has been meeting with land speculators and representatives from the railroad. They're planning something big, and I have reason to believe it involves this ranch." Willow frowned. "What could they want with your land specifically?" "Water rights, primarily," Yates explained. "The Callaway Ranch controls access to 3 natural springs and the best stretch of Silver Creek. In a territory where water means survival, that's power. And Kane wants that power," Willow said, understanding dawning. "Kane wants everything," Yates replied, a bitter edge to his voice. "Always has since we were boys together in Texas. This was unexpected." "You knew Kane before Arizona?" Yates nodded, staring into his glass. "Our fathers were partners in a cattle operation near San Antonio. When mine died, Kane's father swindled my mother out of her share, left us with nothing. I was 16, worked whatever jobs I could find to keep food on the table for her and my sister." He took a swallow of whiskey before continuing. "When I was 22, I won this land in a poker game. The previous owner had never developed it properly, didn't realize what he had. I spent every penny I'd saved bringing my mother and sister out here, building something lasting." "And Kane?" Willow prompted gently. "Kane inherited his father's talent for taking what isn't his," Yates said. "He followed the money out west, set himself up as a businessman in Redemption Creek, but he's nothing more than a well-dressed thief. When he discovered I'd made something of myself, he couldn't stand it. We've been at odds ever since." Willow absorbed this information, pieces falling into place. "So when you helped me in town—" "It wasn't just about saving a woman in trouble," Yates admitted, "though that would have been reason enough. When I heard them call you Sin and saw Kane's men hunting you, I knew whatever story they were spreading was likely false. Kane doesn't deal in truth, only in whatever narrative serves his interests. I'm still just a pawn in your ongoing feud," Willow concluded, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. Yates looked up sharply. "No, that's not what I meant. Yes, helping you irritated Kane, but that was never my primary motivation, and it's certainly not why I asked you to stay on as manager." "Then why did you?" Willow challenged. "Why go to such lengths for a stranger?" Yates set down his glass and leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Because I recognized something in you, a resilience, a dignity in the face of injustice that reminded me of my mother after my father died. Because I believe in giving people the chances I never had. And yes, because something about you called to me from the first moment I saw you hiding behind that wagon." His honesty was disarming. Willow found herself wanting to believe him, wanting to trust that his intentions were as genuine as they seemed. "Kane won't stop," she said quietly. "Not with me and not with your ranch." "No, he won't," Yates agreed. "Which is why I need to know if you're planning to run again. I won't hold you here against your will, but I hope you'll stay. Not just because you're good at the job, though you are, but because—" He hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. "Because," Willow prompted, her heart racing. "Because I think we could build something good here," Yates finished, his blue eyes meeting hers. "Together." The word hung between them, full of possibility. Willow knew he wasn't just talking about the ranch anymore, and the realization sent warmth spreading through her chest. "I've spent so long running," she admitted. "I'm not sure I remember how to stay in one place, how to trust that it won't all be taken away again." "I understand that better than most," Yates said softly, "but some things are worth the risk." In the flickering firelight, with his eyes holding hers, it was easy to believe him, easy to imagine what together might mean. But the practical part of her, the part that had kept her alive these past difficult months, wasn't so easily convinced. "I need to think," she said finally. Yates nodded, disappointment flickering briefly across his face before he masked it. "Of course. Take all the time you need. My offer stands, regardless of your decision about other matters." As Willow rose to leave, he added, "There's one more thing you should know. The telegram today wasn't just about Kane's business dealings. He's spreading word that you'll be worth $500 to whoever brings you to him. Dead or alive." A chill ran down Willow's spine. "He's that determined. It's not about the money anymore or whatever your father owed," Yates said grimly. "It's about his pride. You defied him, escaped him. In Kane's world, that can't go unpunished." "All the more reason for me to leave," Willow said. "I'm putting everyone here at risk by staying." "Or all the more reason to stay where you have protection," Yates countered. "Kane's bounty puts a target on your back. At least here you're not facing it alone." He was right, and they both knew it. Alone, she'd be vulnerable. Here, she had allies, security, and a man who looked at her like she was something precious rather than something to be possessed or punished. "I'll stay," she decided, the words feeling right as soon as they left her lips. "For now." A smile broke across Yates's face, transforming his usually serious expression. "Good, that's good." As Willow left the study, she couldn't help but smile in return. The future was still uncertain. Danger still loomed. But for the first time in months, she felt something like hope taking root in her heart. Hope, and perhaps something deeper. Something she wasn't quite ready to name, but that grew stronger every time Yates Calloway looked at her with those summer sky eyes. The following weeks brought changes to the Callaway ranch, some visible, others more subtle. With Yates's full support, Willow implemented new systems for tracking supplies and managing the hand schedules. The ranch operated more efficiently than ever, with profits from the Tucson cattle sale exceeding expectations. Less tangible but equally significant was the shift in Willow's place among the ranch family. She was no longer viewed as an outsider or temporary addition, but as an integral part of the operation. The men sought her approval and valued her opinion. Alina treated her like a daughter, teaching her to make traditional Mexican dishes and sharing stories of the ranch's early days. And then there was Yates. Since their conversation in the study, something had changed between them, a new awareness, a charged current that ran beneath their daily interactions. They still maintained a professional relationship in front of others, but Willow caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice. His hand lingered when passing her the ledgers. Their evening discussions of ranch business stretched later into the night, conversations drifting from practical matters to personal histories, dreams, and philosophies. One evening in late August, as the first hint of autumn crispness touched the air, Yates invited Willow to ride with him to check a section of fence on the property's western boundary. The real purpose was transparent to them both: a chance to be alone, away from the curious eyes and ears that seemed to multiply around the ranch house. They rode in companionable silence for a time, enjoying the golden light of late afternoon as it painted the landscape in warm hues. Wild flowers dotted the hillsides, last blooms of summer defying the coming change of seasons. "It's beautiful here," Willow remarked as they paused atop a ridge overlooking the valley. "I never thought I could feel so at home in such an open space. In St. Louis, everything was crowded, confined." "And here?" Yates asked, watching her profile against the setting sun. Willow smiled, breathing in the clean air. "Here I feel free, like I can see forever in every direction." She turned to him. "Thank you for showing me that was possible." "You did that yourself," Yates said. "I just provided the opportunity." "You provided much more than that," Willow replied softly. You believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself." Yates dismounted, tying his horse to a small juniper before helping Willow down from her mare. They stood close, his hands lingering at her waist, her face upturned to his. "Willow," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. "These past months, watching you build a place for yourself here, seeing your strength and determination, I've never met anyone like you." Her heart raced as his hand gently cupped her cheek. "Yates." A gunshot cracked through the peaceful evening, the bullet splintering bark from a tree mere inches from where they stood. Instantly, Yates pushed Willow behind him, drawing his revolver as they both scanned the surrounding terrain. "There," Willow whispered, pointing to a glint of metal on a ridge about 300 yards away. "Rifle." "Get to the horses," Yates ordered, firing back to provide cover. "We need to get out of the open." They made a dash for their mounts as another shot kicked up dirt at their feet. Willow swung into her saddle, Yates right behind her on his stallion. They rode hard toward a cluster of boulders that would provide better protection. "Kane's men?" Willow asked as they dismounted again, this time using the rocks as a shield. "Likely," Yates replied grimly, checking his gun. "They must have been watching the ranch, waiting for a chance to catch you away from the main house." "Us," Willow corrected. "They were waiting for us. You're as much a target as I am." 3 more shots hit the rocks near their position, confirming they were still in the gunmen's sights. "We're pinned down," Yates said, assessing their situation. "But they'll have to approach to get a clear shot, and that means exposing themselves." As if on cue, they heard the sound of horses moving closer, at least 3 riders by Willow's estimation. She checked her own revolver fully loaded, thankfully. "I won't let them take either of us," she said with quiet determination. Yates looked at her, something fierce and protective in his eyes. "No one's taking you anywhere, not while I'm breathing." The approaching riders stopped about 50 yards away, still using the terrain for cover. A familiar voice called out, "Callaway, send out the woman and you can ride away from this." "Tobias Kane," Yates muttered, his expression darkening. "Should have known he'd come himself." "One woman isn't worth dying for," Kane continued. "She's nothing but trouble, a thief and a liar," says the biggest thief and liar in 3 territories. Yates shouted back. "Go back to town, Kane. You're trespassing on my land." A harsh laugh floated on the evening air. "Not for much longer. The railroads made their decision. This valley will be the main route through to California. You're sitting on a fortune in right-of-way payments, Callaway. Once you're out of the picture, your manager can sell to me at a reasonable price. Or I can just take what I want from her, same as I planned before you interfered." Willow felt cold fury rise within her at Kane's words. The man had pursued her across hundreds of miles, not just for the twisted principle of the thing, but because he saw her as a means to an end, a way to get what he really wanted: Yates's land. "I'd rather die than give you anything," she called out, ignoring Yates's warning look. "That can be arranged, Sin," Kane replied. "Though it would be a waste, you could still be useful with the right persuasion." The crude implication in his tone made Willow's skin crawl. Beside her, Yates's jaw clenched, his knuckles white around his gun. "Last chance, Callaway," Kane shouted. "Send her out or we start shooting." "There are 3 of them," Willow whispered. "Maybe 4. We can't hold them off forever." "We don't need forever," Yates replied quietly. "Just until dark. Hector knows our usual routes. When we don't return by sunset, he'll send men looking for us." As if to punctuate his words, another volley of shots hit the rocks around them, showering them with stone fragments. One of the riders had moved to a new position, trying to get a better angle. "I count 4 now," Willow said, spotting movement to their left. "They're trying to surround us." Yates nodded grimly. "We need to reduce their numbers. I'm going to draw their fire. When I do, take a shot at the one on the left. He's the most exposed." "No," Willow protested. "That's too dangerous." "I trust your aim," Yates said simply. Then, before she could object further, he darted to the edge of their cover and fired twice in quick succession. The response was immediate bullets hitting all around him as he dived back behind the boulders. But the distraction worked. The rider on the left rose slightly to get a better shot at Yates, and Willow took her opportunity. Her bullet found its mark, and the man toppled from his horse with a cry of pain. "Good shot," Yates said, squeezing her shoulder briefly. "3 left." An angry shout came from Kane's position. "You'll pay for that sin. Both of you." The remaining riders began firing with renewed intensity, keeping Willow and Yates pinned down as the sun sank lower on the horizon. Shadows lengthened across the valley, offering both danger and opportunity as visibility decreased. "We need to move while we still have some light," Yates said after a lull in the shooting. "If we can make it to those trees, we'll have a better chance of escaping in the dark." Willow nodded, though the thought of leaving their relatively secure position made her stomach clench with fear. "I'll go first," she said. "They want me alive. They might hesitate to shoot directly at me." "Absolutely not," Yates began, but Willow cut him off. "It makes tactical sense, and you know it," she insisted. "Cover me. I'll signal when I'm safe, then cover you." Before he could argue further, she prepared to run, gathering her courage. "Yates," she said softly, meeting his eyes, "if something happens to me—" "Nothing's going to happen to you," he interrupted fiercely. "We're both walking out of here together." The word echoed their conversation from weeks before, weighted with even more meaning now. Willow nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. "Ready," she whispered. At his nod, she took a deep breath and sprinted from behind the boulders toward the tree line 30 yards away. Immediately, shots rang out, but as she'd predicted, they seemed aimed more to stop her than kill her. Yates's covering fire gave her the precious seconds needed to reach the first trees, diving behind a thick trunk just as a bullet splintered the bark near her head. From her new position, she signaled to Yates, then raised her gun, ready to provide cover for his dash. He moved with surprising speed for a man his size, zigzagging to make himself a harder target. Kane and his men concentrated their fire on him, clearly having no reservations about killing the rancher. A bullet grazed Yates's arm just as he reached the trees, tearing through his sleeve and drawing blood. Willow pulled him down beside her, quickly examining the wound. "Just a scratch," he assured her, though his face was pale with pain. "We need to bind it," Willow said, tearing a strip from her petticoat. As she wrapped his arm, they heard Kane shouting orders to his men. "They're spreading out," Yates said, peering through the gathering darkness. "Trying to flush us out. The ranch is 3 miles south," Willow said, finishing the makeshift bandage. "If we can circle around through these trees, we might be able to lose them." They moved cautiously through the woods, using the deepening shadows for cover. The sounds of pursuit grew more distant, then closer again as Kane and his men tried to determine their direction. After nearly an hour of tense movement, they paused in a small clearing to catch their breath and get their bearings. The stars were emerging overhead, providing just enough light to navigate by. "We should be about a mile from the ranch now," Yates whispered. "If we head straight south," a twig snapped behind them. They whirled, guns raised, but too late. One of Kane's men stepped from the trees, rifle aimed at Yates's chest. "Drop the guns," he ordered. "Kane wants you both alive if possible, but I'm happy to bring back bodies if necessary." Willow's mind raced, calculating options, chances. The man's attention was primarily on Yates, seeing him as the greater threat. She shifted slightly, preparing to move. "I said drop the guns," the man repeated, finger tightening on the trigger. In that instant, Willow threw herself at Yates, knocking him sideways as the rifle discharged. Pain exploded in her shoulder, hot and searing, but she managed to raise her revolver and fire. The gunman staggered, then collapsed, her bullet finding its mark. "Willow!" Yates caught her as she stumbled, lowering her gently to the ground. "God, you're hit." "Not badly," she gasped, though the pain suggested otherwise. "We need to keep moving." "The shot will bring the others," Yates said urgently, tearing another strip from her petticoat to bind her shoulder. The white fabric immediately bloomed red in the moonlight. Gritting her teeth against the pain, Willow allowed Yates to help her to her feet. They moved as quickly as her injury permitted, heading toward the ranch, both knowing that their lives depended on reaching help before Kane's remaining men found them. They had covered perhaps half the remaining distance when they heard horses approaching from the direction of the ranch, multiple riders moving at speed. "Could be Kane," Yates said, pulling Willow behind a large boulder. "Could be our people." "Only one way to find out," Willow replied, her voice weak from pain and blood loss. Yates hesitated, clearly torn between caution and the urgent need to get Willow medical attention. Finally, he raised his gun and fired once into the air, a signal that could bring rescue or doom. The approaching riders slowed, then a familiar voice called out, "Boss." "That you?" Relief flooded Yates's face. "Hector, over here." Willow's been shot. Within moments, they were surrounded by ranch hands, Hector and Crawford among them. Gentle hands lifted Willow onto Hector's horse while Crawford provided a terse report. "Kane's in town claiming you kidnapped Miss Montgomery," he explained. "Marshall's skeptical but had to investigate. Alina told us which way you'd ridden when you didn't return." "Kane and at least 2 of his men are still out here," Yates said as he mounted behind one of the hands. "We shot 1, maybe 2. "Let them come," Crawford said grimly, patting his rifle. "Been waiting for a chance to show Kane what we think of his kind." The journey back to the ranch passed in a blur for Willow, consciousness slipping away despite her efforts to stay awake. The last thing she remembered was Yates's voice close to her ear, urgent and tender. "Stay with me, Willow. Stay with me." Willow drifted in and out of consciousness for what seemed like days. Fragments of reality penetrated the fog, Alina's cool hands on her forehead, Yates's voice reading aloud from a book, the doctor's clinical assessment of her wound. Fever came and went, bringing with it vivid dreams of St. Louis, of her father, of Kane's pursuit across the territories. When she finally awoke fully, sunlight was streaming through her bedroom window, casting patterns across the quilt that covered her. Her shoulder throbbed dully, but the intense pain had subsided to a manageable ache. "Welcome back," a deep voice said from beside her. Willow turned her head to see Yates sitting in a chair by her bed, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept much. He looked as though he hadn't shaved in days, his normally neat appearance rumpled and worn. "How long?" she asked, her voice rough from disuse. 4 days, Yates replied, reaching for a glass of water on the bedside table. He helped her drink, his hands gentle as he supported her head. "The doctor says you're past the worst of it. The bullet went clean through, didn't hit anything vital." "Kane?" she asked after satisfying her thirst. Yates's expression hardened. "Gone. For now. We found one of his men dead where you shot him, another wounded nearby. No sign of Kane or the 4th man." "They'll be back," Willow said, certainty in her voice. "Yes," Yates agreed, no point in denying it. "But things have changed. The Marshal knows the truth now, that Kane's been hunting you across territories, that he attacked us on our own land." "He told you this. He was here yesterday," Yates explained. "Seems Kane overplayed his hand in town, made accusations that didn't hold water. When our men brought in the body and the wounded attacker, it confirmed our version of events." Willow absorbed this information, hope warring with ingrained caution. "It won't stop Kane. He doesn't care about the law." "No," Yates agreed, "but it limits what he can do openly. And it buys us time to prepare." He hesitated, then added, "Of course, if you still want to leave once you're recovered, I'll arrange safe passage wherever you want to go." The offer was genuine, Willow knew, but there was something in his eyes, a plea, a hope that she would choose differently. "I don't want to leave," she said softly. "Not anymore." Relief washed over Yates's face. "Good, that's good." He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "When I saw you get hit when you fell, I've never been so scared in my life. The thought of losing you." "I know," Willow whispered, squeezing his hand. "I felt the same when that rifle was aimed at you." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they'd almost lost hanging between them. Finally, Yates spoke again, his voice low and intense. "I need to tell you something, Willow." When Kane was shouting about the railroad, about why he wanted this land, that part was true. "I received an offer from them last month. They want to build a station here, make this valley a hub for the southern route." Willow frowned, confused by the sudden change of topic. "That's good, isn't it?" "For the ranch, it would make this land worth 10 times what it is now," Yates confirmed. "But it would also change everything. The quiet, the space, the life we've built here. Once the railroad comes through, it all changes." "What did you tell them?" Willow asked. "I asked for time to consider," Yates replied. "I wanted to discuss it with you first." The implication was clear. He saw her as a partner in this decision, in the future of the ranch. The realization warmed her more than she could express. "Whatever you decide, I'll support," she said. "This is your land, your legacy." Yates shook his head. "It's our legacy now, if you want it to be. When I said we could build something good together, I meant it. Not just the ranch, but a life, a family." Though he hadn't phrased it as a question, the proposal was unmistakable. Willow's breath caught in her throat as Yates continued, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "I love you, Willow Montgomery. I think I started falling the moment I saw you behind that wagon, fierce and afraid but refusing to give up. I love your courage, your intelligence, your compassion. I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." Tears welled in Willow's eyes. After all the running, all the fear, all the uncertainty, here was something solid, something true. A man who saw her, really saw her, and loved what he saw. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I'll have you, Yates Calloway. I love you too." He leaned forward, capturing her lips in a gentle kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, Willow saw her own joy reflected in his face. "They called me Sin," she said softly, "but you saw something different." "I saw the truth," Yates replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I saw my salvation." The weeks following their engagement passed in a flurry of activity. As Willow recovered her strength, wedding preparations began, with Alina happily taking charge of the arrangements. Word spread throughout the territory that Yates Calloway, one of the most eligible bachelors in Arizona, was finally getting married, and to his mysterious ranch manager, no less. The story of their confrontation with Kane added a romantic sheen to the gossip. In the retelling, Willow became a heroine who had saved her beloved from certain death, while Yates was the steadfast protector who had defied a powerful enemy for love. Neither Willow nor Yates bothered to correct these embellishments, amused by how quickly the narrative had spread. More practically, they made their decision about the railroad. After lengthy discussions, they agreed to sell a portion of the land for the station and right-of-way, maintaining ownership of the core ranch property. The proceeds would allow them to expand their operations, improve irrigation, and build a new, larger home on the hill overlooking the valley. "A home for our future," Yates said as they reviewed the architect's drawings one evening. With room to grow. Willow smiled, understanding his meaning. The thought of their children filled her with a joy she'd never anticipated. After so much loss and uncertainty, the promise of creating a family with Yates felt like the most precious gift imaginable. Of course, the shadow of Tobias Kane still loomed. Though he had retreated to Redemption Creek after the failed ambush, both Willow and Yates knew it was only a matter of time before he tried again. The railroad deal would only intensify his resentment, his determination to possess what Yates had built. "He won't stop until one of us is dead," Willow said one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. "You know that, don't you?" Yates nodded, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "I know, but I won't live our life in fear of him. We'll be vigilant, we'll be careful, but we won't let him take this from us." "No," Willow agreed, resting her head against his chest. "We won't." Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect October morning with just enough crispness in the air to hint at the changing seasons. The ceremony would take place on the ranch, near the creek where Willow had saved the mares, a place that had come to symbolize her acceptance by the ranch community and her commitment to her new home. Alina had transformed the area into something magical, with wildflowers and ribbons adorning a simple wooden arch. Lanterns hung from tree branches, ready to cast a golden glow when evening fell, and the celebration continued. Nearly everyone from the surrounding area had been invited: ranch hands and their families, traders from Tucson, friendly rivals from neighboring properties. In her room, Willow prepared with Alina's help, donning a gown of ivory silk that had been ordered from San Francisco. It was more elegant than anything she'd ever worn, yet comfortable enough for a woman accustomed to riding and working alongside men. "You look beautiful," Alina said, adjusting the simple veil. "Like an angel." Willow smiled, touching the silver locket at her throat, her mother's, the only piece of jewelry she wore besides the engagement ring Yates had given her. "I wish my mother could have seen this day." "She sees," Alina said with quiet certainty. "Mothers always do." A knock at the door heralded Crawford's arrival. The gruff ranch hand had surprised everyone by asking if he might escort Willow to the ceremony, in place of the father she had lost. "It would be an honor, Miss Montgomery," he'd said when he made the request, hat in hand and a rare vulnerability in his weathered face. "Seeing as how you've become like family to all of us." Now he waited awkwardly in the doorway, dressed in his Sunday best, his usually wild hair tamed with water and pomade. "Ready, Miss Montgomery?" he asked. "Everyone's waiting." "Ready, Mr. Crawford," Willow replied, taking his offered arm, "and thank you for everything." The walk to the creek seemed both too long and too short, a dreamlike journey through the ranch that had become her home. Faces turned to watch her pass, smiling, approving faces of people who had accepted her, quirks and all, into their community. And then she saw Yates, standing tall and proud beneath the flower-adorned arch, his blue eyes finding hers across the distance. The love in his gaze nearly stole her breath, pure and powerful and certain. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of emotion. They spoke their vows, exchanged rings, sealed their promise with a kiss that drew cheers from the assembled guests. As the celebration began, with music and dancing and more food than even the hungriest ranch hands could consume, Willow found herself happier than she'd ever dreamed possible. "Mrs. Callaway," Yates murmured as they swayed together for their first dance as husband and wife. "How does it sound?" "Perfect," Willow replied, smiling up at him. "Absolutely perfect." As night fell and lanterns cast their golden glow over the festivities, the celebration showed no signs of ending. Willow had just finished dancing with Hector when she noticed a commotion at the edge of the gathering. Men were moving quickly, hands dropping to weapons, voices rising in alarm. Yates appeared at her side instantly, his expression grim. "Kane," he said simply. "He's here, with men." Willow's heart sank. Of course Kane would choose this day, this moment of perfect happiness to make his move. "How many?" "At least 10, Yates replied. "Armed, they're demanding to speak with us." Around them, the celebration had paused, guests sensing the sudden tension. Ranch hands moved protectively toward their families, while others positioned themselves near Willow and Yates. "We should meet him," Willow decided. "End this, one way or another." Yates nodded, taking her hand. "Together." They walked to the edge of the property where Tobias Kane waited, flanked by his men. He looked thinner than Willow remembered, his face gaunt and eyes burning with an unhealthy intensity. The months of obsession had taken their toll, transforming him into something almost skeletal, consumed by hate and envy. "Quite a celebration," Kane called as they approached. "Shame I wasn't invited." "State your business, Kane," Yates said coldly. "Then get off my land." Kane laughed, the sound brittle and harsh. "Your land. Always so proud of this patch of dirt, aren't you, Callaway? So convinced you've built something meaningful here." "More meaningful than anything you've done," Willow said, stepping forward despite Yates's protective hand. "What do you want, Kane? Haven't you lost enough men trying to get to us?" Kane's eyes narrowed as they fixed on her. "There she is, Sin herself, now playing the respectable rancher's wife. You fooled everyone but me, my dear. I know what you really are." "A woman you couldn't break," Willow replied steadily. "That's what truly bothers you, isn't it? Not my father's debts, not your cousin's humiliation. The fact that I refuse to be controlled, refuse to submit." Something ugly flashed across Kane's face. "You think you've won? That this farce of a marriage protects you? I'll take everything, this land, this ranch, and yes, eventually you. I always collect what I'm owed." "You're owed nothing," Yates said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Whatever claims you think you have died with your father's crooked dealings. You've been living on stolen fortunes and borrowed time your whole life, Kane, and it ends now." Kane's hand moved toward his gun, but Willow was faster. The small derringer she'd concealed in the folds of her wedding dress was in her hand before Kane could clear his holster, aimed steadily at his chest. "Don't," she warned. "I've already shot 2 of your men. You'll be the 3rd if you try anything." Around them, both sides tensed, hands hovering near weapons, the air thick with potential violence. For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, unexpectedly, laughter broke the tension, not Kane's this time, but the marshal's. Marshal Davis stepped out from behind Kane's men, badge gleaming in the lantern light. "I'd listen to the lady if I were you, Kane," he advised, his own gun drawn. "Mrs. Calloway's got quite a reputation with that derringer." Kane's face contorted with rage. "What are you doing here, Davis?" "This is a private matter. Threatening folks at their own wedding seems pretty public to me," the marshal interrupted. "Not to mention the warrants I'm holding from Kansas and Missouri, charging one Tobias Kane with fraud, extortion, and attempted murder." Kane's men shifted uneasily, clearly not having signed up for a confrontation with the law. One by one, they began backing away, loyalty to Kane rapidly diminishing in the face of potential arrest. "This isn't over," Kane spat, his eyes burning with hatred as they fixed on Willow and Yates. "You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll be back." "No," Marshal Davis said calmly. "You won't. You're under arrest, Kane, and this time there's enough evidence to ensure you spend the rest of your days in a territorial prison." As the marshal and his deputies moved to take Kane into custody, the man made one last, desperate lunge, not for a weapon, but for Willow. His fingers barely grazed her arm before Yates's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling in the dirt. "That," Yates said with quiet satisfaction, "was for my father, and for every person you've ever bullied, cheated, or threatened." Kane looked up from the ground, blood trickling from his split lip, defeat finally registering in his eyes. Whatever power he'd held over them, whatever fear he'd inspired was gone, broken like his pride. As the marshal led Kane away, Willow felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a burden she'd carried so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to stand truly free. Yates's arm circled her waist, drawing her close against his side. "Well, Mrs. Callaway," he said softly, "that was quite a dramatic end to our wedding celebration." Willow laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in years. "I suppose we'll have quite a story to tell our children someday." "And grandchildren," Yates added, smiling down at her. "A family legacy of standing firm against those who would take what isn't theirs." Around them, guests were returning to the celebration, the music resuming as though the interruption had been nothing more than a momentary pause in the festivities. Life on a ranch in the Arizona Territory had accustomed everyone to occasional drama after all. As Yates led Willow back to the dancing area, he paused, turning to face her fully in the golden lantern light. "When I first saw you in Redemption Creek, they called you Sin," he said, his voice for her ears alone, "but I knew better even then." "What did you see?" Willow asked, her heart full. "My salvation," Yates replied simply, "the future I never dared hope for, a woman strong enough to stand beside me through whatever comes." "And I will," Willow promised, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "Always." As they rejoined their wedding celebration, surrounded by friends who had become family, Willow Montgomery Callaway knew that the road ahead might still hold challenges. The railroad would bring changes to their valley. Children would test their patience and fill their lives with joy. The ranch would demand hard work and sacrifice for many years to come, but none of that mattered, not really. What mattered was this: a love built on mutual respect and shared courage, a partnership forged in adversity and strengthened by choice. A future limited only by their imagination and determination. They danced beneath the stars, husband and wife, rancher and former fugitive, each other's chosen family. And if anyone still whispered "sin" when speaking of Willow Callaway, it was only in stories of how she had faced down danger with a steady hand and unwavering heart, stories that grew more legendary with each telling, passed down through generations of Callaways who would call the valley home. For in the end, what others called her never truly mattered. What mattered was what she and Yates had found in each other: redemption, purpose, and a love strong enough to weather any storm the Wild West might bring their way.